Hello, Tom DeVecchio here with the latest edition of the New Theory podcast. I try to get out, but I get pulled back into the mob genre. Today, we have a very, very special guest in the studio, Larry McShane, who is not even released yet. So make sure you get your pre-order because this will be out shortly. If not, order it when it comes out on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or wherever you get books. Little Vic and the Great Mafia War. A little about Larry McShane was with the Daily News for years. He stood over Castle on his body. I'm going to ask him about that. And he also wrote the book of The Chin, The Life and Crimes of Mafia Boss Vincent Gigante. Larry McShane, welcome to the New Theory podcast. How you doing today, brother?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
And I love him, so humble. So we're going to jump right into it. So this new book that came out focuses on Little Vic taking on Colombo Persico. For those people who may or may not know, give us a little bit of background and context on who Little Vic was and why he started the coup.
Okay, well, I mean, it sort of starts with the idea that the two guys we're talking about, Little Vic and Carmine Persico, were actually quite friendly. Persico actually put him up for membership in the mob. I should say specifically the Colombo family. They had sons who were very close and very friendly. So there were ties between the two. And then, you know, Persico ends up going to trial. What did he get? 100-year sentence, I believe, for the Giuliani prosecution, the racketeering prosecution.
Yep.
And they need to bring somebody in to run the family, acting boss in his absence. And the first guy that was chosen within 2 years was dead.
Who was that?
I can't even think of his name, but he was shot in his garage in New Jersey.
Oh, in Kenilworth, New Jersey.
Yes,
I think. Yeah.
that's correct.
Yeah,
I can't think of his name either.
While you're doing this, I'm going to Google.
And so at this point, Vicarino, loyalist to the Persicos, friend of the family, is bumped up to be the acting boss.
So the one part I didn't get, it's not coming up. It's gonna come. There was a hit in Kenilworth, New Jersey, because I think I know the person.
It was definitely in a garage in Kenilworth, New Jersey.
Yeah. And it's like odd because that way specifically, because a lot of guys were in Elizabeth and Newark, moved to kind of either Kenilworth area or Edison area, but that area was heavier on Genovese and higher on the Cavalcante. Not many. I didn't know of any Colombos that way. So that when that did happen, I thought that was odd. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was interesting. All right. So the part that I don't get, and we'll kind of we'll unpack it, is Vic's the underboss at this point. He was a money guy, right?
Yes,
he wasn't
exactly.
He was more of a racketeer. So let's give a little context about like that part of it.
Yeah, I mean, Vic was not a guy who was running around the streets with a gun.
Correct.
You know, he's not a guy that's doing heists or robbing banks. He's just a smart guy who is a very good earner.
Yeah.
By all accounts, caused no problems with anybody. Well liked. As I mentioned, his sons and the sons of the Persico side were worked together in some businesses. They were very close. And so after the execution in Jersey, he's the guy who gets the call to step up and take over in the absence of Junior Persico.
So the part I never understood is Junior's in jail. He says, "Hey, Vic, you're going to be the acting boss." Junior's away for life, right?
Sure, of course.
And when you're the acting boss with a guy who's away for life, you're basically the boss, right?
Right.
So is it ego or logistics? And let me tee both up. Ego meaning, hey, I still get the money I make. I make a lot of money. I have a lot of power. I could do my own thing. It's just ego. I need to be the boss. Or was it logistics where did he not make as much money? Did he have to go to Junior for every big decision? What was it that Vic was like not satisfied with the acting role? I always wondered that.
My impression is that he wanted more autonomy.
Okay.
He didn't want last say on everything, but he didn't want to just be like a figurehead in the family.
Yeah.
You know, he wanted to be more active. And yeah, there was never, I mean, I spoke with with two of Vic's sons who said, like, he never wanted to take over the family.
Yeah.
Andrew, his son, and then Johnny, who was in the who actually worked with some of the Persicos,
Yeah.
and so that was just basically it, like, and there were hard feelings on each side. I mean, it's in some degrees it's so pointless too, because everybody knows that within a couple years, Alley Boy Persico is going to be coming out of prison, and obviously he's the heir apparent.
Yeah.
So in a lot of ways, it, I think most people would say this on either side it was about, it was just kind of a pointless and senseless way to go to war. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but what was interesting was, and we'll talk about the Scarpa thing in a minute, because that tipped the scales more like a thumb on the scale, well, more than two thumbs on the scale. But what I found interesting, though, is it got chopped up pretty interesting. Wild Bill Cotolo, and I interviewed Billy Cotolo.
Did you?
Yeah, for the podcast. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and speaks glowingly of his father, loves his father.
Oh, the son.
The
right,
son.
right,
No,
right.
not
I was
Wild
like,
Bill.
wow,
No,
you got him.
No. But
Okay.
I was gonna say I'm good, but I'm not that good.
I'm impressed.
No. Billy Cotolo Jr. should have said that. Sorry.
Yeah.
So Billy Cotolo Jr. interviewed him, and obviously great affection for his father, and he kind of gave his insight. I personally believe, and I get a lot of crap for this, I think there's a spectrum when it comes to informants.
Right.
Some are self-centered, some do lie, some are kind of bad people. But like when somebody kills your father who you're close to and you don't have your button, God bless, get your revenge. So like I think there's a spectrum. But my point being is what I found interesting on the split within the Colombo family is Wild Bill went with Vic Arena, correct?
That's correct.
Who is arguably the most important capo at the time, I would say. Would you agree?
Most
important and powerful cap on the family.
He was a big feather in the cap of the Arena faction.
So why do you think he went with Vic versus Junior?
I think it was just loyalty. You know what I mean? He was one of the guys called in by the Arena side, and he signed on. And of course, he's the guy who went after the snake, in that failed shot outside the apartment in Brooklyn. So I think he was like a big addition for the Arena faction.
Yeah.
He held some sway among the other guys.
Yeah. Big earner.
Yeah, made a lot of money, and clearly had a loyalty to the Arenas.
And then on the other side, obviously, had Scarpa and his FBI contacts. But also the Cessas played a critical role, no?
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I was thinking today when I was coming out here, Carmine Cessa obviously cut his deal and made his peace. But his brother, who got arrested at the beginning of the war, is still behind bars.
Yeah, Michael, right?
Yeah, it's like 30 plus years. And
a picture recently looks good.
There's you can go online and see all this stuff. But like all these family members, relatives, and friends sent in letters to the feds to try and get him released. And this has been going on, like I said, for 3 decades.
Yeah.
And I think his brother got like 5 years. Does that sound right?
I think so, yeah.
So, I mean, how do you figure that out?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if you remember that story. There was a story where I think Scarpa or somebody visited, I think it was Carmine Cessa, just to kind of gauge him on which side he wanted to go on. But just as a backstop, just in case he didn't say Persico, the Persicos showed up like 100 deep. So I remember I hung out a lot in Dyker Park in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
And the Persico's house was around the corner, but you couldn't swing a dead cat without running into a cousin or an uncle, a friend, a brother. Right. So they had like Brooklyn on lock. Like I always say, Colombos are not the most powerful, but I've always felt they're the most powerful in Brooklyn. Have you found that over your years? Like in Bensonhurst, Dyker Heights, Bay Ridge. I was going to say that.
Look, that's where Little Vic came from as well. He was born there and raised there before he finally settled out in the suburbs.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think he's part of that too.
So I always say the mob at this point does not carry out many hits. There's a lot of beatings that you don't hear about, but they don't account for many hits these days. However, the Colombos will throw down. Like, to me, the Colombos are like a glorified street gang. And if I had a beef with any of the 5 families, I would not want it to be from a Colombo, right? So they're probably the most violent and the most vicious, at least here in the U.S.
I'd throw in most self-destructive as well.
Most self-destructive as well. We'll get into that in a minute. So my question to you is, was that an historical thing, or is that maybe more under Junior?
That's a good question. I'm trying to
I don't
think.
remember like Joe Colombo putting out a ton of hits. If anything, was more of a
No,
business guy.
but
And
then Joe Colombo did get killed.
oh, that's true.
So he's
Joe Gallo.
Yeah, exactly. They had a bit of a history of it. You know what I mean? Not just randomly spraying bullets, but boy, there's two guys right there though.
Well, okay. So then also you look at like the history of the five families. So I'm gonna venture to guess. I think we would agree. The Genovese are probably the most powerful, obviously, in modern day.
The Ivy League.
The Ivy League of the mob. And then respectfully, the least powerful right now, as I understand, is the Colombos, right? If you say we're in 2025, which is scary,
Yep.
in 6 years where we had the 100-year anniversary of the commission meeting, there was probably only 4 bosses, real bosses in the Genovese over that period. There's probably 16 with the Colombos. I'm a big believer in leadership matters. So why has there always been kind of a challenge with leadership within the Colombo family?
You know, it just seems like there was a more volatile mix of characters there than there were in the other families. You know, and I think history would show that they were quick. I was going to say quick to react, quick to overreact. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. And yeah, they've had turnover at the top, which is never a good thing. You know, and you know, look at the war, and look at the two sides of the war. Like, you know,
3 wars, right? You got the Gallo, and then 2
there was
more,
a gallows in the 50s, right?
Yeah.
And then there was the one that ended with him getting shot. In, exactly.
Italy.
Yes, exactly.
Yep.
And then of course there's this.
And that was what's his name's place, the horse Ainello. I think he owned Umberto's at the time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think a little known fact. Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. And it's not the Umberto's moved in Italy now. It's another place, so you got to obviously check out the place where it was at. But that was a mobbed up joint where he got hit. Yeah, at 4 a.m.
Huh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Crazy stuff.
With his kids with him too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was his wife at the time, or girlfriend, who was like a PhD, like a brilliant person. But yeah, right there and then.
Good God.
Yep. Goes to show you they'll get you anywhere.
Yeah.
And at the time, they kind of had a little bit of not a mandate, but they didn't want to do it in Little Italy because it was a tourist trap and people made a lot of money there. But yeah, nevertheless. And then there was that. And then there was, I think, another war, right? Before the one in the 90s, in the 70s, that Sammy talks about all the time. And then obviously the war in the early 90s.
Right, exactly.
So you had volatility all along. I remember I was like, in high school, and it's like, there's a mob war. It's like, the kid at the bagel shop got killed, had nothing to do with it. I mean, this is
Matthew Speranza.
Yeah, this is supposed to be like Cosa Nostra, which is supposed to be the higher rung of criminals. These guys are shooting each other in the middle of the street, Yeah,
well, I mean, the bagel shop shooting was the thing that really
tipped it,
amped everything up. And all of a sudden, they're on the network news. I mean, they brought in every gangster in Brooklyn, right? And had them stand up. And
it was the undoing. Well, many undoings, but that was one of them. Now, in terms of strategy, they did have Larry Mazza on. Have you spoke to Larry in the past?
I didn't. No.
Okay. So I spoke to Larry Mazza.
I read his book.
Yeah.
Everybody's got a book.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody's got a book. Everybody's got a book. Again, little Vic and the Great Mafia War. But from Larry, I kind of took it as, well, obviously, one, the Scarpa thing and the FBI stuff. We'll get into that in a second. But number 2, Vic's people were the money people, not as much as the tough guys, in the broader scheme. But also their philosophy was, we're not going to run, we're not going to hide, we're going to do our own things because we're powerful, versus, the Persico's their faction kind of went underground, went to the mattresses, if you will, and then kind of popped up where they needed to kill, right? Like that one shotgun shooting with Mazza.
Oh, yeah.
You got to forgive me who he killed, but people watching this will drop in the comments. They'll know. My point being is, what was Vic Arena's strategy to win, in your opinion? What was Junior's strategy? And set up kind of that chess piece, the chess moves, and what moves did they make? And obviously Junior came out on top. So give us kind of like the gambits that were made from each side.
I mean, I'm pretty certain that at first Vic's response was to get together with the people on the other side who he'd known for years, whose sons had grown up with them.
Yeah.
And try to come some sort of resolution. And there was, it just wasn't happening,
Was Scopus hit based off the war, or was it based off of the Windows trial?
It was apparently based off some debt that he owed. I believe, one of the Persicos. I know it's often counted as like one of the casualties in the war, but that was
had like big money.
yeah. Well, he was killed outside his house right after coming home from dinner. But yeah, I think it's been pretty much determined now that was not related to the war. It was more of a personal beef. Yeah.
Interesting. Do you buy into the belief that Gotti may have egged on Vicarina to get to kind of control a little more of the commission? Because you figure he had Messino, he got him back in. That was his boy at the time. Vicarina would be kind of his emissary. So now he's got 3 out of the 5. You buy into that at all?
Yeah, 100%, of course. Yeah, he wants to be the head of the commission, the guy who's making the calls on these things. And if you got 3 out of 5, or 3 and 1, because I think were the Bananos still they were kind of persona non grata.
They were kind of in the process of getting back in, or if not back in. And obviously Messino kind of brought him back to prominence before he flipped. And I think Gotti is the one who helped broker that. Supposedly they stopped selling drugs. I doubt that, but supposedly. All right, but then let me ask you this then. So I'm looking at like almost like a CIA type war. If Gotti goes to Arena and says, "Hey, I'm going to help you out," right? At the time, he had probably 300 people on the street that were made, tens of thousands of associates. In terms of firepower, not strength, but firepower, probably even stronger than Genovese. Why didn't you think he might have lent him more material support? Maybe carrying out hits, maybe guns, maybe money. It's almost like, hey, I'll help you out. You should do this. But I don't see, at least in the history notes tell me, that there wasn't a lot of like tactical support given from Gotti. What's your take on that, Larry?
Well, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that the guy Gotti put first was John Gotti, and I mean, he was, he's doing his own thing, really. You know what I mean? He's enjoying life as the biggest boss in New York, and he's out on the town every night. And I don't think assisting Vicarina was high on his list of priorities.
And he had other problems too, yeah.
Yeah, so but he got involved in far as the Tommy O'Sera hit.
Yes,
and that wound up being the thing that really did Vicarina in.
Now, at this point, we're kind of circling around the 90s. Vic is like obviously losing. They didn't get scooped up yet. What was like the final, like how did it end in terms of like from your perspective and your research and talking with the families?
How did the war end?
Yeah, how did it when was it officially over?
I mean, it almost ended by inertia, you know what I mean, or a lack of. If my numbers are right, which I think they are, there were like 123 people arrested.
Jeez.
Yeah. And so, the workforce, for lack of a better term, was very depleted. And, there was no, I mean, I guess you could say, that the Persicos won, but it's kind of a Pyrrhic victory.
Yeah.
For Vic, he was in prison. He got hammered at trial. He's still 91, I think. And
they denied his capacity release, I think, like twice.
Yeah, I spoke to Andrew just last week.
Yeah.
And they're trying, but they really don't. There's not even like a glimmer of like, well, if we did this, blah, 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 blah.
Well, you talk about that in the book. The other thing is, and one thing I really like about this book, so you probably heard this in the past, there was a little resurgence in the mob genre, if you probably noticed, last 5 years.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. A
few informants had some shows.
Every informant has a book now.
That's true. And you were on my other show, which you got me in a lot of trouble, but I still stand by you. I still love you. But we'll get to that in a moment. But one of the things that kind of stand out, if you will, is you wrote this book, but got in touch with the arenas, Andrew, et cetera, where a lot of these guys write books and do not reach out to the families. So did you feel compelled? Did they reach out to you? Because I think this is like, because what happens is a book comes out, right?
Right.
And then nowadays with social media, there is like a whole other side against your book because you didn't reach out to the family and you're enabling informants. You're doing all this stuff. No, you actually worked closely with the Arena family. So was that something that you reached out to them? They reached out to you? And then how did Andrew and his family help sculpt this book?
Yeah. I'll start with the question of how things started. A guy that I had worked on a book about, Ralph Natale.
Yeah.
He's a mob boss in Philly.
Yeah.
He,
Tangentially.
Yeah, exactly. So he had a deal to do this book, and so he and I worked on that. And he knew Andrew Arena, I think.
Okay.
And so, he says to me, like, this might be worth doing. So I said, yeah, why not? See what happens. And so I got a hold of Andrew, talk with Andrew and, all good. And then I brought it back and there was like, no, we don't have any interest in this. You know what I mean?
Wow.
Which I was surprised at. And then the guy who said no to it was retiring last year.
Yeah.
And he had been the guy who got me the Chin contract.
Nice.
And he's like, I'd really love to do one more book with you. And I said, why don't we do that book on the war in the 90s, right?
Yeah.
Junior Persico, the Arena faction.
Yeah.
And he's like, hey, So it was kind of like a last ditch.
Yeah.
So at this point, I reach out to Andrew. And I'm like, I know it's like 2 years later or whatever, but
Hey.
the book is a go,
Nice.
So then we arranged for meetings out at Andrew's place out in Long Island. And it would be him and his brother Johnny. And I'd drive out there. I never realized how much traffic there is on Long Island.
Yep.
But I'd drive out there and we'd have coffee and something to eat. And these guys would just have all these. If you had any questions, they never said, I'm not going to answer that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They answered every question you asked. They, to me, created a lot of the best stuff in the book. It's first-person stories.
Yeah.
And so, I've told them this, but I would say it again. I owe them both a great
Nice.
debt of gratitude for their time and their help throughout. And they had two different perspectives on it, too, to some degree. Andrew was not a made guy, even though, he's in the group or whatever. Yeah. And Johnny was a made guy.
Yeah.
He was in on the illegal stuff. He's in on the gas tax thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So he's front and center in all this stuff as the boss's son too, right?
Correct.
So I think the good thing, or one of the good things from them, was you could be in a room with the two of them and get two different perspectives on things.
Yeah. But that's what makes this book special because, again, you have your perspective as an expert. You've interviewed some of the really kind of big names. Now, let me just see, because I got this from your publicist. But you pretty much talked to everyone about this book that is still around. My question to you is, Greg Scarpa, how did, DeVecchio get away with, helping him? I'm scratching my head to this day.
Yeah. I'll just start off with this. I obviously thought I had to talk to DeVecchio, but I really had no idea of how I would do it or if he would want to do it.
Yeah.
So turns out I discovered there's this website where you can go on if you're doing historical work and just say, hey, I'm writing about this. It's disseminated to all these agents.
Interesting.
Yeah, and they have the option to call you back or not. So I put one out on this, and I hear back right away from one guy who was there when Carmine Sessa is arrested on the steps of St. Patrick's Cathedral.
Oh, wow.
So he's got this great story about that.
Ironic.
We're chatting. But yeah, right, exactly. So I'm like, yeah, this is great. And then I see I got another email, and I open that, and it is from Lind DeVecchio, who says
whoa,
who just says, whatever you want to talk about, we can talk about. And so I was on the phone with him for an hour and 15 minutes.
Wow.
You know, and there's some great quotes from him in the book about, you know, what he would have liked to have done to Favo, the FBI agent.
Yeah.
And he was, I mean, in court and out, and in every conversation with me, adamant that, you know.
Yeah, what was his narrative? He kind of was like, Scarpa was like a rogue and he didn't know what he was doing.
He comes to New York in 1980,
Yeah.
I think. He'd already been an agent elsewhere. And he decides he wants to see if he can get a couple of informants. And I guess Scarpa had been out for 5 years. This is in 1980. For 5 years, he had not been working for the feds. And so DeVecchio decides, like, let me see what I can do with this guy. And he just does a cold call. Yeah, outside his house.
Okay.
And, you know, it's not an instant, you know, marriage made in heaven or whatever, but it develops into, like, you know, he's the informant and he's the Fed. And
wow.
And I mean, that continued. We were saying 1980. The war ended in 93.
Wow.
So, you know, that's a long run. And obviously, and you couldn't have known this at the time, you know, with the war and everything. But he's at the epicenter of everything, right?
Correct.
You know, his crew committed more murders than anybody.
But that's my point. If you have an active CI and there's a hit that they like allegedly do, doesn't that like section chief be like, hey, let's get him off the street or get him? I don't know, like somebody somewhere, like where's the accountability on that, something like that?
Well, I mean that's why he had a 2-year internal review, which he beat, and then the trial, you know, which just turned into a debacle.
That was a circus.
Yeah, you know.
Wow.
But I would say if we could call Lind DeVecchio on the phone right now and say, he would just say, I did not do anything wrong. And, you know, this was, I can swear.
Yeah.
This is all bullshit. You know what I mean? He would, he did not give an inch.
Wow.
Not 1 inch, insistent that the allegations were just all made up.
Interesting.
You know,
wow.
and then he beats it in the most bizarre fashion you could ever.
Yeah, well, there was like a technicality, or there was
the wife Linda.
Yeah,
is the big witness for the government, and she's telling all the stories about, like, you know, the gifts that DeVecchio was getting from Scarpa and inside information, that type of thing. Blah blah blah. So she testifies one day, and she's got to come back the next day. And Jerry Capisi and Tom Robbins, when they see the stories in the paper, they realize that it contradicts all this stuff that she had told the two of them for a book they had been working on, like in the mid-90s.
Interesting.
And they saved the tapes.
Wow.
So they show up at the courthouse, and they have the tapes in which she basically contradicts a lot of the things she said on the witness stand, and the whole case just collapses. You know, DA Joe Hines has egg all over his face, and Lind DeVecchio walks away. No chance to try him again, right? No double jeopardy, and that's their. I mean, it's. I can't think of anything comparable in terms of in terms of just total.
If Scarpa was giving him gifts, I guess protocol would be to either not accept them or B, I guess, turn them in and catalog them. I would guess.
I think that's correct. Yeah.
Did he do that as far as we know?
He said that, like, you know, a lot of this was exaggerated. You know, like his thing would be like, is somebody offering me a bottle of wine, for example? I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But yeah, he was. I mean, it would have been interesting to see him take the witness stand, but it never.
Yeah, I was going to say
it never got to that. You know, soon.
So in terms of your research, I don't want to give too much away in the book, but in terms of your research, with Junior winning the war, was it more of what Junior did right and Arena did wrong, or Junior outplayed him? I know, again, Scarpa and his kind of resources were the tipping point, but what was, like, from a strategy standpoint? Kind of break that down a little bit from your research.
This will sound a little odd, but I think the advantage went to the Persicos because their guy in charge was in jail already. You know what I mean? And the arenas get involved, and you know,
you got to win and stay out of jail.
Little Vic is their guy, and right, all of a sudden, if you're on the Persico side, this is business as usual, right? If we want something done, we're going to go through. Was he in Lompoc at that time?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, we're gonna go through that. We can get somebody out there. We can have them call us on the phone. We can do that. When Vic gets arrested, it's completely out of the blue. It's in the middle of the war.
You can't plan it.
Yeah, and you know, I think, you know, his absence, you know, particularly given his son's involvement, was a big blow to their side. You know what I mean? And the Persicos never had that because their lines of communication had been set up already to get a hold of their boss.
Correct. So Little Vic and the Great Mafia War, Kensington Press. This is going to be available, I think, the 25th of February, correct?
I believe that is correct.
All right, so make sure you get it. So to kind of touch on a few more things before we wrap up. So you released, oh man, the bane of some of our existence in the space. We did interview that same day. So you got my old co-host and I a little bit of trouble because we had you on the podcast because you released an expose that suggested that Junior Persico was a rat and used some documentation on the top echelon informant program. Yeah. And I don't know if you saw the end result. There was like defense attorneys doing podcasts. If there was at least 20 shows after that, separate from what we did, that'd be the minimum 20 shows. So we had you on, I think, that same day. Tell us the story when you were down the shore before I got a hold of you. Tell us what happened there, and then talk a bit about
who was his lawyer at that point. Was it La Rosa?
Was it DiPietro? No.
It might have been. Well, anyway, it doesn't matter. But yeah, I'm on vacation down the shore.
Yeah.
And one of my colleagues is working on this story, and he calls me just to basically fact check some stuff. You know what I mean? And I'm, you know, I don't want to say I'm not paying attention, but I'm down the shore on vacation with my wife and kids.
Having a cigar.
You know, exactly. So I get up the next morning. My wife is putting the coffee on. The phone rings at like 7 o'clock in the morning. Of course, you're thinking like, is something wrong here? And whichever lawyer it was, he just starts fucking screaming.
Yeah, there was.
I mean, like
there was a piece the next day, and I guess he had some juice because he was like totally contrary to what.
Yeah, well, the next day I got involved a little bit more, I should say, in putting it together. But I mean, now the next thing I do when I get off the phone from getting screamed at is I go over to the Wawa to get the newspaper, you know, and there's this picture of this rat with his head on it. Yeah. And I think the headline was "Junior was a rat," or
I think editorial had a little liberty with that one.
But yeah, so it's not. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a good story to tell. Here we are. You know what I mean? But when that guy just started screaming, you know how it's like that time in the morning, you're thinking something wrong, something happened.
Yeah.
This guy, you know, you and your goddamn lying partner, and of course, I haven't even seen the paper. I have no idea exactly what lies we're talking about. You know, so that was a good day.
So basically, in your guys' research, you guys found out that there was a top echelon informant outside of Scarpa, or later on did you discover that was Scarpa?
I believe that these guys had found a list of top echelon informants. I'm not sure how they dug it up. I think Andrew might have been involved.
Okay.
But I'm not 100% sure.
And how do they connect that to Persico, at least for the story?
His name is mentioned specifically in the paperwork.
Got it.
Yeah, so it's not like they pulled it out of midair or whole cloth. It was in there, but you know, the lawyer was just saying it's bullshit.
But you guys never recanted either.
No.
Interesting.
You know,
freedom of the press.
Well, I mean, look, it's not like this came out of nowhere. There was a no doubt about it, FBI document which included his names and the names of several other people. Yeah. So I mean, I was never worried about that.
I mean, you're an established journalist and with a track record. So I mean, you know, when we had John Panisi and I had you on because we wanted you to give your side, and all as it was is we want to have you weigh in and then discuss it. People assumed by having you on that we supported that theory. I don't think he was, and it just kind of took a life of its own. To this day, like I get noticed once in a while from the podcast and from the old podcast, and that's what they bring up. Like, Junior's not a rat. I'm like, I wasn't saying he was in any way.
Well, the funny thing is, I had done a whole story with DiPietro about getting him out of prison and how he was,
I remember that. Yeah.
And I spent a lot of time with his office is up in White Plains, I think.
Yeah, I think
but
so.
I went up there and spent some time with him, and he explained all this to me. He went all over the paperwork, and I did that story, which of course nobody remembered. Was the one came out with the big rat on the front page.
Yeah,
so.
I found, I'm gonna be respectful, I found the mob attorneys to be kind of interesting because, like, number one, how much work is there out there nowadays, right?
Wow, that's true. Yeah.
And number two, I feel like sometimes there's some transference where they have to defend their client, but they tend to be very, like, boisterous, go after the media, jump on podcasts. Like, you're a defense attorney. Like, you guys are already in jail. Well, like, who cares? But that's just my opinion on some of those characters.
Well, I mean, Bruce Cutler.
Yeah, well, good example of utilizing the.
Who, by the way, was one of the first guys to come by after Vic and Johnny Arena beat their case. He came up to the Tombs, and he just said to the two of them, what you have done is something that will never be done again. To beat these things, you guys are facing life in prison. Basically, like, it's a miracle that you guys are going to be out. And I think they got 5 and 7.
Wow.
Vic got 7 and Johnny got 5.
Wow, which is nothing. Yeah.
Well, and if you get banged on the RICO, it's 20 right off the top,
Minimum,
right?
Yeah, which is crazy.
Yeah.
What do you think? And again, like, obviously now it's different, but what was the undoing of the mob? 90s on. What you say? It's RICO. Was it maybe not as good recruits?
I would say it's Blakey. The guy,
Blake. Yeah,
and Rudy Giuliani.
Yeah.
And once Giuliani got that rolling, by the time Gotti came around, the federal courts in Brooklyn were looking to bring in some cases of their own, and it just it was like dominoes at that point.
Yeah.
But the concept of the RICO Act, which gave them so much leverage in prosecution, and just, at the time, there were these guys who were in the newspapers. You know what I mean? I mean, Gigante walking around with a bathrobe on, for God's sake. And
did you ever get to speak to him for your book?
To
Gigante?
Oh God, no, you couldn't get near him. I
don't know if you. I mean, I figured he wouldn't talk to you, but
no, I did a story with his.
Rita?
And
I had her on a little while back.
Yeah. I went out to visit her. She was living in North Jersey.
Yeah.
It was funny. She was very pleasant. And then, of course, at some point I was like, what was it like growing up with your father? Yeah. And she's just kind of like,
yeah.
So we kind of jumped around that. But yeah, she's, I saw her. She's been doing some stuff.
Yeah, she's doing some stuff. She was on my show, a whole bunch of shows, some bigger shows. And she's really pleasant. I mean, she's in Jersey.
Very nice. Very
We'd love
nice.
to get her in studio. I'll reach back out to her. She's
up in Bergen County, I think.
She's
right?
an empath.
Really?
Yeah. So I wanted her to come to. I they want to tell the future, I think, or they know, or they sense energy.
Yeah, I don't know.
I needed to read me. I don't know.
Hopefully, I'm like a 66-year-old white guy from New Jersey.
Well, let me ask you this, because again, you've been around. You stood over Castellano's body almost, right? What happened during? You were a junior reporter and you got called out. What happened during the Castellano hit?
Oh yeah. I'm working like a swing shift, like maybe a 3 to 11. And I was pretty low on the totem pole. I'd worked for maybe 2 years on the overnight shift, and then they finally brought me a big deal. They come put me on and just put me on nights. You know what I mean? And there used to be a printer that the NYPD would send out, so-and-so shot and killed, this address. And this one comes over like whatever, white male shot 45th Street, East 45th Street. And then phones start ringing. We have guys down at police headquarters down at the shack. And so, God, I was young back then. They're like, you need to get over there right now. And so, I ran, from, I guess we were in Rockefeller Center, and I had to run over to
Sparks?
3rd Avenue. And then when I got there, it was like a movie set.
Wow.
You know, like they had Klieg lights everywhere. Now, you couldn't get close, but you could see the bodies were still out in the street. You know, the driver's on one side, he's on the other side. And I'm just like, oh, my God, you know what I mean? And then
Were you on the mob beat back then? Or not
No,
yet?
I was just the dude who was working the night shift.
Yeah.
And then Jim Fox, the head of the New York FBI office, shows up, and I was with Rich Lamb, who used to work at CBS News Radio. He's retired now, I think. And so we got Fox right away, and he gave us the stuff. I mean, it's nothing good. And then I ran back to the phone, pulled out all the change I had in my pocket. You know what I mean? It was
The old days.
but it was crazy. I mean, I some days I can't remember what I had for breakfast. But if anybody asked me that story, I could tell them the whole thing. You know what I mean?
Wow.
Yeah, it was crazy.
So, you grew up in New Jersey, right?
Yeah, born in New York. Then my parents had the old Irish triplets, and off to New Jersey we went. Yeah.
Love it. So being kind of in its twilight, the mob, right? Like New York, New Jersey, I can only speak from the New Jersey standpoint.
Right.
The mob kind of, good poker clubs when I used to go out and play poker, or, you could get certain things cheap, or, you get a friend if you had a problem. But like for the most part, a lot of those days are done. New York is a lot different now too. Does like New York and New Jersey, does it even need a mob anymore? Or in your opinion, it's just, you know what? It's kind of done, and that's how it should be. Or do you think there is some room for the mob in current environment?
I kind of feel like it's done.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Everything is so different now than the way
Correct.
it was back then.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to some degree, the mob in New York was, I wouldn't say they were tolerated, but they operated, and, nobody's getting arrested every day.
Correct.
And this, that. And I think now that would not be the case, that, something like that happened.
But think about it, right? So you're probably one of the few people that was there when Castellano got hit, right? And it's still releasing content today. You're talking about a 40-year span, right?
Yeah.
And in that time, they were at minimum, the Gambinos alone were probably a $300 to $400 million operation.
Oh, yeah.
Back then. And now they're probably, if they're lucky, a $300 $4 million operation in current dollars, not just for inflation. So literally, this 100-year organization in the U.S. You could argue tracks back to as early as the 1600s, right? Even if you go back that far. But within that 40-year span, just pretty much dissipate.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you think of, I don't know if people understand how entrenched the mob was. Like the idea that if you wanted to put up a building using concrete in Manhattan, you know what I mean? Yeah,
Windows,
there was 2%,
drywall,
I think. Yeah, right, exactly.
Drywall.
So, I mean, it was, I think it's safe to say it was pretty much widely accepted, even though it was incredibly corrupt and expensive.
Correct. For everybody.
For the city and for the construction companies as well,
And then over the years, because you have a legendary career, over the years, because Jerry Capisi to me is an interesting character in terms of.
I love Jerry.
Yeah, in terms of he was a guy who kind of had his hand on the pulse of what's going on with law enforcement. I would think defense attorneys, and I feel like he had direct contacts with people that would just say, "Hey, here's what's cooking." Right? Did you have any guys from the street ever reach out to you over the years?
Yeah, what was the guy's name? He was an old guy, and he was retired. Joe Dogsy and Uzi.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And I did a whole story about him.
Interesting.
Yeah, but other than that, no.
He never got threatened or any.
No, God, no.
I was saying back then,
Yeah.
like in the 80s or 90s, you heard about.
But you know what? I mean, I'll say this, and I'm not joking either.
Yeah.
Like, I'm working at Associated Press.
Yeah.
Like, you're here. That's my hand low on the table.
Yeah.
And, you got the New York.
Yeah.
It's New York.
Yeah.
New York Times,
Yeah.
the Daily News,
Yeah.
the Post. So,
Yeah.
we were, my story's a little down on the totem pole. I guess they got read outside New York and across this great nation of ours. But in
Good
New
point.
York, I was kind of low man on the totem pole.
All right. I asked this question. I used to ask it. I don't ask it as much. If you could have dinner with anyone dead or alive from the mob life, who would it be and why?
Oh, it'd be Gigante,
Really?
100%.
Okay. Why?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wrote the book, and I felt like I learned a lot about him. But I would just, look, I was in court the day when he took the plea.
Yeah.
And he was speaking to his son, who was going to be the next guy in. And, I mean, I was just like, oh, my God, what am I seeing here?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Now, maybe the average person would be like, you'd see two crooks going to jail.
Yeah.
But here he was, like, standing up, doing the thing. And if he was willing to talk, it would just be a great thing. You know what I mean?
So the Gigante book, I read it a while ago, and I had it anyway. So I knew who you were. I was all excited to talk to you. I followed you with the New York Post. I read the book. I thought it was a great book. I guess when I had you on the show with Panisi, and you know, maybe because people were upset at you, but a lot of people gave me a lot of shit about your Gigante book.
Really?
They think a lot of it was full of crap. Yeah, I mean, I'm like, you're a researcher. You do the best of your ability. Obviously, you do interviews. You do everything you could. I don't think anything when there was out of pocket. But what do you say to some of that feedback? I don't want to say it's so long ago. I don't know what specific points there were. But I remember when I had Jan, like, why would you have Larry on? He's a hack. That Gigante stuff is BS. But a few people reached out to me. But when I asked them and pressed them, what was BS? They didn't really give any specifics.
Yeah.
So I don't know. But anyway, so how do you deal with haters? Are you like, established guy? You're a legit guy. You work for some of the periodicals, best periodicals in the industry, but yet you still get shit. Like, how do you deal with that?
I don't care. I don't care. I probably heard worse from my wife. You know what I mean?
I love it.
40 years.
I love it.
Yes, no, that doesn't. People can say whatever they want.
I love it. And then what I know of you, you've always been a gentleman. You're a laid back guy, and it's an honor.
Well, I mean, here's the other thing, which I would just add. I know the work that went into the book.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and you stand by it.
Yeah, that's all.
Little Vic and the Great Mafia War. We'll hopefully get Larry back on again soon. He's not too far, and when I want to get some cigars, hopefully he'll be around. And if he'll join me, I'll have a cigar with him now. But listen, please get this book. Support Larry. Drop your comments below. Be nice. And thanks for being on the show, man.
Thank you so much. It was great seeing you.
It was a good one.
All right.